WPLJ Power 95, Breslev, love.
Tu dois le faire comme métier, là. C'est mon métier.
Alright.
C'est pas mal, ça.
ארינו מקשר עצמנו בלימוד הזה. לכל הצדיקים האמיתיים שבאדוננו ולכל הצדיקים האמיתיים שוכני עפר הקדושים בעצם אף אדוננו הקדוש צדיק יסוד עולם נחמן ומקור חמר רבי נחמן בן פגה. נחמן מיומן. זכותו יגננו בכל עמו ישראל. אמן כן יהי רצון. Let's do the class Bezrat Hashem in the Refuah Shlema of any names, please. Yechiel Yosef Ben Yafa.
בריאות הגוף ובריאות הנפש.
ירדן.
ויינר.
ירדן
בן
בצר.
יפה גם כן. I took upon myself to be his mom.
נונה בת רבקה חיה. רחל בצר.
שלמה בן חסיבה.
מרדכי בן מוטרם. שרה בת חיה. קרן בת פלורנס. מרדכי בן מסודי. שמחה בת תירו. יעקב בן ברטה, דניאל יהודה בן רבקה שושנה, אסתר בת חיה, רבקה בת אסתר מלכה, שרה בת חיה, בנימין בן חנה, בתיה בת שרה, שמעון בן ג'קלין, שני חיה בת מרים בת מסודה, יונתן בת לאה, גדל בת זיסלה, ראובן בן זוהרה, יחל מידעניין בן טובה בשה, אברהם בן מסודי, הר ניסים בן ימנה. וכל חולי עמו ישראל, אל נא רפן עליהם, זכות כל הצדיקים, תגן בדיהם, צנהם, רפואה שלמה, רפואת הנפש והגוף. Amen. כן יהי רצון. And for the hiloula, Be'ezrat Hashem, if you want to do the class to elevate the neshamot of anybody that's passed away, for anyone that wants to give a name, Solika, Bat Simcha, Miriam Bat Yeshua, Suzy Bat Alice, Shimon Rafael Ben, Toria Tova, Shlomo Ben Rivka. On recommence. Ilan, Yuval, Chai, Ben Sonra, Ninette. Yarden Ben Orli, Zari Ben Berchi, Meir Ben Clara. אלעזר בן דוד ורוחמה, רוזת בפרחה, מנשה בן רחל ומסוד, קלארואית בת שמחה, מדיסה ברון בת יהודים, לסיה הרבנית, בצל טוב בן מוחה פינטו, ניסים בן אסתר, אדמו"ר חמים בן שלמה ז'אז', ז'נט נינה חיה בת יוסף ידליה, נפתלי, דניאל בן סוליקה, רייזל בן פרחל, רחל חיה יפה בת ויטורה, מרים, סימון בן חנה, אילן מסיקה בן שושנה, יעקב בן מרים, חיה בת פרלה, סוליקה בת מזל. And all to the people that, and all the people that passed away in the last year, and all the people that have passed away, many sidurot in this time period, Be'ezrat Hashem, in the merit of all the tzadikim, Tiye nishmatam tzura b'tzura chayim, may all the neshamot havaliot, and the merit of the holy tzadikim and the neshamot be elevated to their resting place. Amen. So tonight we have, I don't usually say this, but I think if I have the merit to say this, tonight we have a very, very special class. We have a very special class because we're in between the hilulot of Rebbe Meir Baal Haness and Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai. And tonight we're going to split the class between Moshe and I. We don't usually do the classes often together, but we're starting to a little bit. And I want to share a little bit in the beginning of the class on Rebbe Meir Baal Haness because we just had his hilula and Pesach Sheni. I also want to then jump into giving a little bit of an introduction on Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai and the Zohar. We're going to talk about the famous story that's maybe not so famous about how Rebbe Nachman made his way to Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai and how they met, which is a story that I've been waiting to share for for about a year now. So I've been really excited to share this, and Be'ezrat Hashem we'll definitely be able to go into it. So Be'ezrat Hashem, maybe we have the merit of being able to hear this, and then with the help of Hashem, hopefully at the end, Moshe is going to share with us the parts of the Zohar that discuss the death of Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai and the passing. Even though Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai is very much alive, nonetheless, the physical body has to pass away at some point. So Moshe is going to discuss some of that at the end of it. So to be able to start off, I just wanted to give a little bit of kavod and merit to the holy tzadik, Rebbe Meir Baal Haness, and start off by just sharing a couple things as we just passed the zilulot. We know in the Zohar, we say that the first 3 days after a person's before a person's passing and after a person's passing, and of course including the actual night of the hiloula, so the 7 days included, the neshama comes down into the world and is able to bring a special amount of abundance to the people that either go pray by the kever or the people that are connected to the tzadik, and that are able to connect to the person in any way. So Rebbe Meir Baal Haness, even though his hiloula just passed by a day, we're still able to connect and still be able to give kavod to the tzaddik and also to very special holy people. So tonight is also the beginning of the 7 days of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai coming down. Even though some would argue because the neshama of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is part of the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu and part of the special 5 that we discuss often in the classes, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai's neshama is constantly active within the world, and all the very, very special holy tzaddikim. But tonight we're going to discuss a little bit about it. So without further ado, there's a very famous phrase that we say, and also one last point before I get into the class going. I don't usually read from text in the middle of the class, but tonight, because I'm going to share with you a very special letter that the grandson of Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Avraham Sternhatz, received by Mesorah, by direct teaching from Rabbi Nachman to Rabbi Natan to in direct lineage, we're going to share, and I wanted to keep it as close to the actual text as possible. So I'm going to be reading a lot from a piece of paper when I share with you the story about how Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came to meet. That being said, I'll try to make it as fluid as possible, and for the other parts of it will be outside the actual text, but just that people understand that I don't usually really read from it, but in the meantime, it's important for this one to be as precise as possible. So, as there's a famous phrase that we say, Ela de Meir Aneni, Ela de Meir Aneni, Ela de Meir Aneni, right? And people say it usually 2 times, some people say 3 times, some people say 1 time. That's a little bit less important, but the important reason why is that there's a couple of things that are important to understand about this phrase. Number one, Rebbe Meir Baal Haness didn't just get the title of being a person that is Baal Haness, the person that is essentially the master and the person that can do miracles. It's a special type of ability and a grace of Hashem that was granted to him through his avodat Hashem and through the work that he had done. Rebbe Meir was a very special person. I heard that in the process of this phrase coming to be in the world, that Rebbe Meir was in some form of a descent, which we cannot really understand because the descent of very holy tzaddikim, we don't actually understand at all in any of its entirety. Now, the reason why is because at that point he referred to himself, and it was a conversation that was happening between him and Hashem, to the point that there was no name of Rabbi involved in the name. That's why the famous phrase, it's important to say it, Ela de Meir Aneni. And there is no word Rabbi in it specifically. But sometimes people reference Ela de Rabbi Meir Aneni, but just so that people understand, the actual phrase itself doesn't include the name Rabbi Meir. That being said, whenever I heard one of the answers, the reason why we use this phrase often in corresponding to Elad, essentially to the Lord and to the God of Rabbi Meir, essentially, or Rabbi Meir at the time, and we say Meir, answer me Aneni. The reason why we use this prayer is because there's an argument in the Gemara that discusses essentially between prayer, whenever a person's coming towards Hashem to be able to do tshuva, and a person is doing tefillah in front of Hashem. There was an argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And essentially, they were saying whenever a person comes in front of Hashem and they come to pray, is it counted as if the person is coming to pray as essentially a servant in front of Hashem, or is the person considered to be a son of Hashem, a child? And the argument that they go through their own divine wisdom to be able to decipher whether the person is a tzadik essentially or a person that is working on themselves, they say if the person is a tzadik, he's considered as if he's a son, this according to Rabbi Yehuda, and if he is a person that's filled with sin and a person that has many things that he's not doing properly, then he'll come to him in the process of tshuva as a servant. And that's the way Hashem views him. That's according to what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. And Rabbi Meir responds by saying that he's viewed as a son in front of Hashem no matter what. And so one of the reasons why we say this phrase is to say that Be'ezrat Hashem, no matter what we are, no matter what position we are, even us, that we're in the final generation before the Mashiach coming, amen, is that hopefully that no matter what we do, no matter how much we descend, and no matter how much evil that exists in the world, and no matter how much we might taint ourselves through sin, it's very important to understand that we always view ourselves and we say Ela de Meir Aneni because we want to be viewed as the son in front of Hashem no matter what, even as a person that does sin. And so part of that is the reason why whenever we say that phrase, you can say it really for anything, but it's known whenever a person has a lost item, whenever a person feels distant, when a person feels like they've lost something. So that's partly connected to that. I want to share one last thing with Rebbe Meir Baal Haness that I heard from Nathan Uzon, who's a French Breslover in Eretz Israel, and he gives wonderful classes. For those that listen to classes in French, I highly encourage people to be able to listen to it and learn as much as possible. he shared something really incredible. I was listening this week, and he said that to show you the power of how incredible a simple thought a Jew can have is, there's a midrash that's brought down that in the story of Purim, whenever the servant of essentially the people that were catering towards Achashverosh in the Megillah came to him at night because he couldn't sleep, and they brought him the book of all the different types of records of all the debts that the king owes. And eventually, as we know, the story was that Mordechai had saved the king and he wanted to repay the debt. So he asked Haman, and he said to Haman, essentially, what should I do to the man that saved the king and graced the king, and how do I return honor to this person? And Haman told him all these different types of things that are very mystical but also very powerful, which is give the clothing of the king, give the horse of the king, give the power of the king over to this man, right? Which, by the way, is a reference to Hashem and the tzadik, and there's lots of different types of deep concepts, but we're not going to spend time on the idea of Purim. And what happened was, the Midrash says that as Haman came to Mordechai eventually, as we know that Haman thought he was talking about himself, but it eventually ended up being Mordechai, he came with the clothing of the king, and he came in front of Mordechai, and he started to prepare him to bring him onto the horse. The Midrash says that the horse was very high, and Mordechai couldn't get onto the horse easily. So what Haman did is that Haman bent himself down, and he allowed him to step on his back and his shoulders to help him get onto the horse. And when he did that, he had a positive thought. One positive thought, as a rasha. Because we say, it's a very famous phrase, even Breslovers say this all of Purim, we say, Atzileni miklipat Haman Amalek, v'zakeni lekdushat Mordechai ve'Esther, that we should be saved from the klipa, the evil forces and the negative energy of Haman and Amalek. V'zakeni, we should have the merit of entering into the kedusha and the house of Mordechai and Esther, the house of the kedusha of the Shekhinah and the Kudsha B'richu, the essence of Hashem, the tzadikim. And so, in this moment, when Haman is letting Mordechai on his shoulders, Rabbi Natan says, Rabbi Natan of Breslov, the main student of Rebbe Nachman, he says that he had a good thought. He had a good thought of tshuva. He had a thought of essentially maybe Hashem is really the king, and maybe Mordechai really is the tzaddik. And in that one little thought that he had when he stepped on his shoulders, it created something in his mind. And that little thought in his mind eventually became the seed, because we know, according to the Kabbalah, and there's a lesson in Yikutei Moharan that discusses this, which that the semen that a man has that eventually impregnates a woman so that a child can be birthed into the world, comes from the seed of a man in the mind. That's where the Zera stems from. And that little good thought created a seed. And that seed eventually gave birth to Rebbe Meir Baal Haness, that descends directly from Haman. Which is that one of the holiest tzadikim, one of the main students of Rabbi Akiva, the one that Rabbi Akiva essentially said publicly, this is the person that's going to continue being the Rav after he passed away, because Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai was the Rav of Sod, essentially, and he couldn't take the public figure. But Rebbe Meir Baal Haness took the public figure of it. And Rebbe Meir is Ben Gerim, he's a son of converts. And he comes directly from this lineage. And so we see that even from the darkest place, we see that one positive thought, even from a Rasha Gamur, that we can see that from there, even one good thought can create something. So imagine for a simple Jew, how having one good thought or one good intention can bring any Jew back to Hashem, and it can do anything to affect anyone and change everything within the world.
How does it convert from a thought, from
So
a man into
without going too much into it, essentially it says that the white of the space, the mind of the seed, in the mind essentially is the stem. And this is why also there's a lot of connection in the Shema whenever it says Lo tatoru achal v'avchem b'achanechem, because a person that sees bad things and engages in looking at things that are impure, they create negative thoughts and negative energy. That will manifest into bad things that can then be birthed into bad things. Now, physically, spiritually speaking, lots of different types of things. But it essentially roots the seed in the mind, which then gives into the form of the blood, and then eventually leads into the person being able to actually give over positive seed.
But he didn't conceive Mir, that's why I don't see the correlation.
For what?
From the thought of Aman,
Yeah.
and Rebbe Meir Baal Haness.
Generations later.
Okay.
Generations later, it passed on.
There is a lineage between Aman and Rebbe Meir Baal Haness.
That's what he was saying. That's what he was saying from Yuzon. No, yeah, of course, through conversion, because he was not obviously Jewish.
You know, one of the most interesting things about
Rebbe Meir Baal Haness.
Rebbe Meir Baal Haness is Boria.
Yeah, his wife.
Boria, his wife, who had to go through a certain interesting, yeah.
All these people, honestly, you know, one thing I was thinking about before I was giving the class is that, you know, we have lots of classes that we discuss tzadikim, but I was thinking today about the fact that we say the names of tzadikim so easily, but we don't actually spend enough time to think about the fact that just the fact that we're saying the name Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, really in reality, not to like go a little bit too far, but our bones should actually shake in reality. Because the fact that we're naming a person, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Elazar, when they stepped outside the cave, they had the capacity to be able to burn a single person with their eyes, with their vision. Like, these are people that were so holy, just the fact that we're even able to say their names. I was talking with a friend earlier today. I was saying, I don't really understand, to be completely honest with you. There is no answer, and this is where you kind of have to throw logic out of the window. There is no logic behind the fact, I told him for myself personally, I don't understand the merit that I have, that I can say that I study the books of Rebbe Nachman of Breslev, or that I'm able to open up a Zohar, and to say that I believe that Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is a tzadik, that I open up his book, and that I do that. Just the merit of being able to say that, there is no explanation behind it, because you can go into a bunch of different types of questions and stuff like that, and you'll go back as far as you want, but in reality, it's just a gift of Hashem. There is no explanation behind it. The fact that we could sit in a room tonight, and we could discuss, which I'm going to jump into in just in a little bit, stories and wonderful ideas that stem from these holy tzadikim, is mind-blowing to me. And we don't always register it, but it's good sometimes to sit there for a second and just meditate on the fact that you're a Jew that maybe can do shakol, or that you can do Boa Priya Geffen, or that you do Shabbat. It's important to not take anything for granted, because in reality, every single moment is a gift of Hashem. And there's a lot of wonderful stories of the Baal Shem Tov about this, to show you how the simplicity of a single Jew, of just understanding that Hashem takes care of everything for you, and that you're supposed to do everything b'pshitut, essentially, in simplicity. And that's what Rebbe Nachman wanted. Having emunah pshuta, simple faith, was the highest level. Because essentially you give everything back to Hashem. And with that, because we can obviously stay on that subject for a very long time, as everybody knows, we're going to jump in. So, a little bit of an introduction. Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is very famous as being the author of the Zohar. To clarify a couple of things very quickly, there's a lot of people that, and controversy, unfortunately, whatever reason Hashem wants to bring in that controversy into the world, don't understand that Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is the author of the Zohar. That being said, we're not going to go into so much of the argumentation behind it, because Chokhmah is not going to do much for it. But that being said, it's very important to understand that Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai didn't sit down and actually write down every single part of the Zohar, like many tzadikim and holy tzadikim, like Rav Chaim Vital, that wrote the teachings of the Arizal. There was Rabbi Abba, and obviously his son, that wrote down, and many holy tzadikim that had sat down next to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai and wrote for him. Rabbi Abba is one of the most famous ones that had sat down and written for him. We call Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai the author of the Zohar, because it's essentially his text, just like Rebbe Nachman of Breslev is the author of Likutei Moharan, even though Rabbi Natan had sat there and dictated and wrote down the texts. So there's reasons for that, and there's reasons why people are involved in the process. Every single person that was involved in the process, which Moshe is going to get into in a little bit later, is there for a reason. And there's reasons why some people can be the scribe of the tzaddik and write for the tzaddik, and there's reasons why sometimes the tzaddik has to write something himself, but everything has a purpose behind it, and it's very special. Nonetheless, the Zohar is one of the holiest books. It's one of the holiest books to the point that in Judaism we have a concept of having a mitzvah, or having a merit, or having a reward for learning Torah. So, for example, when you learn Torah, you have a certain merit which we cannot understand in heaven, which means after you pass away, they'll say that this person did something that's called schar limud. He has a reward for his learning. If you sit down and you open up the parsha of the week and you learn a little bit, you will have a reward for the amount that you sat down and you learned, whatever you read. The Zohar is the only book, except for Tehillim, but it's a book of Tefillah, it's a little bit different, is the only book that when you sit down and you read it, if you don't understand a single word, you can literally sit there and read it and you don't understand a single word, you get schar limud. There's no other thing that counts like that in Torah. If you open up a book of the Ramchal, or if you open up the Parsha of the week and you read and you don't understand, you get merit for something opening up the book. You might have an even bigger merit for opening up the book than actually understanding what you read. But in the merit, the precise merit of getting a merit for understanding and learning, you don't always get. But the Zohar, you receive the merit of learning even if you don't understand a single word that you read. Just to show you the power of the Zohar. Just open it up and read it. That means, by the way, it's a big sod, because that means that you don't have to do anything. You literally open up the word, you start reading, and it immediately starts working on your neshama. To the point that the Arizal says in, I believe, Shara Kavanot, he says that there is not a bigger tikkun for the nefesh. He says that there isn't a greater rectification for the lowest part of the soul, the animalistic part of the soul, than reading 5 pages of Zohar every single day. That's it. He says there's not a greater rectification for the soul than being able to open up and just start reading the Zohar 5 pages a day. That's what the Arizal says.
But it's difficult. It's written in Aramaic.
Exactly, it's written in Aramaic. There's some people that have translations. If you read the Matot Midvash, you'll have a lighter Hebrew translation to it. But just to show you, the whole point of what he's saying is that you're not going to understand. By the way, whoever says that they understand the real depth of the Zohar cannot say that. Because anybody that opens up the Zohar with normal eyes and a normal brain is going to recognize that they're talking about something that none of the Zohar discusses anything of this physical world. So to understand something that nobody interacts with, whoever says they understand it don't really understand it. There's very few people that understand it. And those that understand it understand not even a drop of a drop of a drop of a drop. We can't even explain the amount that they do understand. So the beauty of what the Arizal is saying, what Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is saying, even what Rebbe Nachman is saying about this, is that it doesn't even matter if you understand it or not. You open it up, just the effort of opening it up and reading lines immediately starts doing work on your neshama, that Hashem is going to start to help you without you even understanding it. That's part of emunah. It's that when you don't understand something, Hashem fills in the gap. So it's very important to be able to understand that a little bit more towards that point. There's something else that people need to understand about the Zohar and the power of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, because we are talking about tzadikim, and I want to build this up so that we get to the story of Rebbe Nachman, is that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up, there's a famous Gemara that discusses, I'm blanking on the Gemara, but it's also discussed in the first lesson of Likutei Moharan in book 2, in the second section of Likutei Moharan, when Moshe goes up Har Sinai, and he has this conversation, and there's a famous Gemara that discusses how Moshe ascends with the angels. There's a conversation amongst the angels, and they say, what is a man doing amongst us? Moshe doesn't want to respond initially because they're seraphim, and they're very high elevated angels. There's a midrash that's brought down in, I'm blanking on the name of the midrash, but it discusses the whole process in Parashat Yitro about how when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai and the process of how he elevated into the first Chekiah, the first level, and he eventually went up into higher levels to be able to get close to Hashem and receive the Torah, all the angels that he went through. People misconceive how powerful this experience is, because there are angels that he discusses that are 500,000 times the size of a human being. Now, this is a non-spiritual manifestation, but it also manifests in some capacities on a physical level, which we cannot understand. Meaning that you have to think about this. The only way to kind of get a little feel of this is imagine yourself as an ant looking at a human being. So people need to understand that whenever they're interacting with angels, it's not just like, oh, this is Moshe Rabbeinu and all the different types of things he does. No, these are angels that there are angels that were 500,000 times the size of Moshe, that those angels were scared in the process when Moshe was going to get the Torah. Those angels were scared of the other angels that were even closer to Hashem, that their breath was able to destroy all the other angels below them. And Moshe was able to kill some of these angels using different names of God, and he was still scared of some of those angels. So we have to understand that there's a degree in which that this isn't just a basic story that's happening. And when Moshe goes up, he says first to Hashem, he says, I'm scared because they're going to burn me essentially with their breath and with their words and essentially their existence. And Hashem says, hold on to my kisei kavod and answer to them. And Moshe starts to begin to do this thing that we teach even young children in school, where we say Moshe tells the angels what? He says, look at the 10 commandments. Do angels do Shabbat? Do angels have to believe in God? Right? Angels don't have free will, so they understand that God exists in the world. And he goes through all the process of saying how the Torah, essentially, is a book that was supposed to be given to man. And through those winning of those arguments, Moshe gets the Torah and is able to bring it down to Bnei Israel. But what's really interesting is a lot of people don't really, there's a very obvious question, which is that don't the angels know by reading the Torah that this is obviously directed towards human beings? So what are they arguing with Hashem? And what are they arguing with Moshe to say that this isn't a book for human beings? Don't they know that the will of Hashem is to give it to man? And so part of the answer that's to be given over here, and Rebbe Nachman alludes to this, is that the Torah essentially, even though today we have a code and we have a book that we study today, is a real book of Torah because it's a book of Torah that it includes everything in it. It has all the levels of what we call pardes, paradise. But it's an acronym for 4 different levels of learning Torah. So there's Pshat, which is the simple level. Reish, which is Remez, which we know as a form of a hint. Drash, which is essentially a deeper study into something. Which also Midrash, and there's people that talk about stories because stories are also very deep. And then Sod, which is essentially revealing secrets. Now, the level of the Torah that we received from Hashem, it includes all of them, but it's clothed in the lowest level in a clothing of Pshat. And the reason for that is because the way that Moshe built his arguments against the angels is he clothed and he used the code of the Torah and the principles of the Torah and the light of Hashem to build arguments from a level of Pshat, to be able to bring the Torah down into the world. The angels actually saw the root and the core and the values of Hashem and the light of Hashem in the concepts of the Torah that are not manifest in the letters that we see today. So when Moshe was arguing with them, he developed the concept of the Torah that we see now as Pshat. But what the Zohar is, that people need to understand, is the Zohar is the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's of the degree of Sod. It's the language that angels understood. So people need to understand that whenever you're picking up and you're reading the Zohar, you cannot remove, you cannot add, you cannot do anything to the Zohar. You cannot add a single letter, you cannot do anything. It's pure Ruach HaKodesh. The book itself is the secrets of Hashem and the upper realms. And that's why for those that actually sit down and read the books, they'll understand that there's nothing about it that can be explained very simply. But nonetheless, it's still very important to study it and read it a little bit because the soul understands. Because the soul is going to hear it and the soul is going to connect with it in a specific way. Go ahead.
It says in Tehillim about this idea that we were just talking about. There's a pasuk that David HaMelech writes, where he says in Tehillim, Alita lamaron v'shavita shevi. Moshe Rabbeinu explaining what happened at Har Sinai. It says Moshe Rabbeinu ascended up on high, v'shavita, and he took captive shevi. So the big question, what shevi means. But if you take the word shevi, it's shin, bet, and yud. So the way we explain it according to the Ari HaKadosh, is shevi is an acronym for Shimon ben Yochai. So Moshe Rabbeinu understood that even the Torah of the Sod, which he wanted to bring down, he could not do it. So what did he take captive? He took the captive, the neshama of Rabbi Shimon, and he brought it and understood that at this time he would bring it down. So he showed all the malachim this neshama, the neshama of Rabbi Shimon, and said, I'm not going to bring down, he is. And when they saw Rabbi Shimon, they backed off. So the Arizal also explains it according to his name, Yitzchak ben Shlomo. If you take Shebi, it's Yitzchak, the last letter is Yitzchak, and working the opposite way, and Yisrael Bar Shem Tov also. So there's lots of different things here where it's going on, where you see this neshama coming down to really protect the Torah of the Sod. But many times the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon writes that a lot of these secrets weren't meant for his generation. You see one fundamental idea in which the only way he'd allow people to come and study with him was one thing, ahava. Because he understood that Rabbi Natan writes many times, and Rabbi Nachman writes many times, that the tikkun for the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, which were in the period of mourning for them, the tikkun, the rectification for their deaths, was through Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because he included this essence of love, in which he said, now let's gather together with love. He had 10 students. And these 10 students came together with complete ahava and complete love for each other to bring down the deepest secrets. So we see, to really come to understand the Torah, you have to have ahava, love for every Jew, for every person. And we see this with Rabbi Nachman, and Chaim Oran, he writes, one time a person came to Rabbi Nachman and asked him, how do I attain diligence in Torah study? Like to become matmid, like to have real strength when I study Torah. And Rabbi Nachman told him, never judge a Jew unfavorably. Why? Because each and every soul represents a letter in the Torah. Because according to the Zohar Kadosh, there's 600,000 letters in Torah, and there's 600,000 neshamot. So when you blemish a neshama, when you find the bad in another Jew, you blemish the entire Torah. So Rabbi Nachman said, be very careful to judge every Jew positively, because with that enough, you're able to bring the Torah to its entirety, its wholeness. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we're gonna try to do that.
He's 100% right, because simcha is so important to the point that the Arizal said everything that he received through simcha. We also see in the Arizal, by the way, a repetition and a similar concept that comes down, being that Arizal also had 10 students that were reincarnations of the 10 students of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai. So a lot of this stuff and a lot of these themes keep on coming back. To jump right into the story, we said that the grandson of Rabbi Natan of Breslev, which was the direct student of Rebbe Nachman of Breslev, so his grandson essentially had this letter that was passed on from Mesorah. Now what happened is when Rabbi Nachman made his way to Israel, it was a very special journey, it's discussed in Chaim Mohan and in many books as well, the importance of how Rabbi Nachman wanted to make his way to Eretz Yisrael. It's a journey that a lot of tzadikim attempted to do. They have to pass through a tremendous amount of struggles. Not all of them were capable of doing it. The Baal Shem Tov is an example of that. Now, what ended up happening that was very special is eventually, one of the main reasons why Rabbi Nachman wanted to get to Eretz Yisrael, there are many, is he wanted to go to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We know from the introduction of Likutei Moharan that Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai are actually connected. They have the same piece, the same neshama. Okay? Kabbalistically, we're not going to go into it because they also have different parts of neshamot that make them unique as well. But they root and they have the same concept, which is they source from the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu. They all have the same neshama, which is the concept of the tzadik yisod olam. Now, this story that was passed on, it was originally written, the first time it was written and passed down and formally kept by Rabbi Natan's grandson, it was written in Aramaic because they didn't want it that if it got into the hands of wrong people, even in Jewish people, because at this point Breslev had gotten persecuted a tremendous amount, they didn't want people to understand the story properly, so it would come off a little bit like another story, and they would kind of disregard it should other people find it. Until the point that many Breslevers already had the story and they had already understood it, and they had a direct descendant, because this is 2 generations, but at the same time while people were alive, that they formally documented it and kept the words based on the direct teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. And so, to jump right into the story, about 26 years old, Rabbi Nachman finds his way, and I'm going to be reading a lot inside the text, so don't mind me when I'm actually putting my head down. When Rabbi Nachman was about 26 years old, he made his way to Eretz Yisrael. When he got to Eretz Yisrael, and he went there, he wanted to get to the cave of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai. When he got to the cave of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, there was this concept that was known until the time that Rabbi Nachman had come, that I think it's even discussed in the Gemara, that there was a massive snake that was encircling the actual cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now today we have a tzion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. When we go to Meiron, we all go pray at the area that is the burial place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But in reality, the actual burial place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is many feet below the earth. And it's inside a cave that people could not enter. That even at the time when people had gone to see Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, many years between his passing in the 2nd century until obviously the time of Rebbe Nachman Abrasov, many people had entered, no one exited. People were actually passing away often, and there are many stories that said it was because of this massive snake that was there. Okay? And there's lots of different types of stories that are like this. It's very common by grave sites of very, very holy people that have hidden grave sites that people cannot enter and people cannot exit. One of the prime examples of this is obviously the cave of the Avot. Right? People cannot enter Marat HaMachpelah and they cannot exit, even till this day. The only time, and when Rabbi Nachman had entered here, essentially he said now there is no danger for people to be able to enter or to exit. He essentially removed the capacity with the snake that was there when he had come. But what ended up actually happening is when Rabbi Nachman had come to this grave site, he got close to the grave, and as he started getting close to the grave, and he started walking up to the tzion where many people were praying at the time, and many people were praying above ground, where the common area where people were praying, he started hearing voices that told him, descend into the cave. And as he started hearing these voices, he started saying to himself, okay, he has to find the actual place where he needs to be able to descend. He eventually found the spot where he had to be able to get down into the actual cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he started making his way down there. And now here's essentially where the story starts. Okay? Buckle your seatbelts. This is really something, let me tell you. When Rabbi Nachman began to descend into the cave, he essentially started to smell and essentially feel all these beautiful perfumes that started to protrude. As I'm reading this story, I'm going to try to give anecdotes because what I did is when I heard this class multiple times, I didn't get a chance to print out the Aramaic. Moshe and I wanted to do the Aramaic and the translation at the exact same time to get you word for word. I did it multiple times to the point that I try to translate for you as close to word for word as I can and to paraphrase in whatever area is necessary. But because a lot of the words and the stories and the words that are being used by Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the story are very cryptic, there has to be some explanation. So I'm going to try while I'm saying some of the things to explain it because a lot of it may not make sense. There's a concept of Gan Eden, that the smells of Gan Eden. There's lots of stories of Rebbe Nachman of Breslev and also many holy tzadikim. When people used to enter a room that was a holy tzadik, they used to say they used to be able to smell the Gan Eden. The room of the Baba Sali, there's many stories about how when people entered into his private room, there were many holy tzadikim that said, I smell the smell of Gan Eden at this point whenever you enter. There's lots of reasons for that, but that's just a little bit of an idea whenever we're going to start talking about scents and odors right now that we're going to talk about in this story. Does anybody have a question? We could stop right now. Yeah.
Didn't Rebbe Shimon, didn't he go to Gan Eden and went through it?
Through
Gan Eden?
Yes.
And
So
him and a couple rabbis went through, and he's the only one that went now alive.
yeah, la Aliyah le Pardes. Yeah. So there's a famous story with Rabbi Akiva, which is also in one of the stories and lessons of Likutei Moharan that Rabbi Nachman discusses, which is a famous story about how 4 people went up to Gan Eden and they had this experience where it's a form of doing Maaseh Merkava and they wanted to be able to experience godliness. But they reached a level that was very high in some of the upper spheres that they were going up to, that there was rules that Rabbi Akiva had set for the people that he was with. It was essentially Rabbi Akiva, there was Ben Zoma, there was Acher, and there was and Ben Azai. And so in the story, without going too much into the story because it's not going to be directly related to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, but it's said that one passed away immediately on the spot because of the revelation. Rabbi Akiva was the only one that entered in peace and exited in peace. There's one person that went in and came out crazy, and then another person essentially became Acher, that became essentially an apikoros, and he didn't believe in God anymore. A lot of it, there's a lot of depth to the story, but that's just the short answer to that because we can't really go too much into that story right now. Otherwise, we'll get sidetracked from this. But you're right that there is essentially Gan Eden, and obviously Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has capacity to be able to go up And very holy tzadikim, like the point that you're bringing up, have the capacity to go up and to go down. Very holy tzadikim can do that. Not everybody can do that, but they go from the place of Gan Eden to the lower realms as well. So, to be able to continue, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. As these scents started to come out and Rebbe Nachman began to descend into the cave, these scents are a reference to something that's called the sense of how when Rebbe Shimon Yochai essentially explains this, that at a certain time during the day, which is the hour that I was discussing with Moshe earlier, which is Tikkun Chatzot. It's the hour where the Rachamim of Hashem is bestowed into the world. That Hashem changes the time from Din in the night and Gvura, the hours of strength and more strong judgment in the world, to hours of Rachamim and mercy and judgment, to remove all the judgments of the world. At the time that is Chatzot, it's not exactly midnight, but it's the time and the hours right around the time where right now it's around 1 o'clock in the morning, but it shifts. So at that point, that's when David HaMelech composed Tehillim. It's one of the most powerful times to be able to sit down and to pray. And what this actually ends up doing is, because there's a reference to tzadikim that Hashem takes, and Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is one of them, that he takes them into a field, and they start smelling all these beautiful odors. And they start being able to collect all these beautiful flowers. The flowers are the concept of the Neshamot of Bnei Israel. There's a garden up there, there's a garden of Eden that reference all the Jews. And that's why it's very important to understand that when it's talking about the garden and it's talking about odors, it's talking about Neshamot, and it's talking about the person that can arouse those Neshamot and allow them to be able to be the best that they can be. And whenever a Jew prays during these hours, he brings out and he releases the sense of Gan Eden. That's why when a person does Tikkun Chatzot, and even does with a little bit of proper intention, he starts releasing in the space that he's in the sense of Gan Eden. He can actually live in an experience that is Gan Eden in this world by doing Tikkun Chatzot properly. And so, as he begins to descend, he starts experiencing all these different types of sense. And as he does that, all these people are referenced to essentially all the different types of flowers that are waking up in the middle of the night to be able to praise Hashem. And as he begins to descend into the cave, he senses that all the supernal worlds and all the upper worlds are beginning to shake, and all the beginning start to create this awakening. Now, understand that mystically speaking, whenever something is happening in this world, there's something happening in the upper worlds. For a person to experience something, a sickness in this world, there's something that's manifesting either on the neshama level, on a much deeper level, or on an upper level that's allowing for it to happen. If there's a disease that people are experiencing in this world, for example, like COVID or something like that, which we don't really want to discuss too much, if people are experiencing a disease or whatever's happening in the world, or tornadoes, or disaster, or mass killings of people, or whatever it is, it's because there's something that's happening up there that mirrors that. So people have to understand that it's not necessarily just the physical manifestation of it, but it's also the spiritual experience of it. And as Rebbe Nachman begins to have these senses that are kind of appearing to him, these beautiful senses, and this awakening that's happening down there and up, he starts sensing, and all these bodies that are buried around Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai begin to awake. Okay? And some of these people, I don't have notes of all the people that are buried next to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, but I believe, first of all, his son Rabbi Elazar, and also Rav Abba, the one that was the main sofer of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, I believe are buried right next to him. I could be wrong, but the people that were there in the cave that are buried right next to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai then begin to arise, and they got to wake up. By the way, just as a separate note, as I'm just seeing this, I'm looking at some of the notes that I have over here. It's very important to understand that also after Shabbat, we also purposefully, we do one of the things that we immediately do is there's a lot of symbolism behind sense and the sense of smell within our religion. That's why we do Besamim immediately after, because it's the first thing that the neshama can be able to sense, that it gives it a sense of purity. And there's a lot of things also that are related even to the other Chagim. In Sukkot, we have the same sense. In other types of things that we have, we usually influence sense, because the sense of smell is not only one of the holiest things, but it's also one of the misunderstood things. Because the sense of smell is also the way that the Mashiach is going to be able to correct and rectify Bnei Israel. And we also know, and I discussed this a couple times in the class, that the sin of Adam was essentially not tainted in the degree of scent, in the sense of smell, because all the other forms of which he had sinned had gone through everything except for sense of smell.
And the neshamot that you mention every week, they came from the nose, right?
Also, that's a good point. Also, we understand that Hashem blew life into Adam through his nose, and how life and breath essentially can act as through the nose. That the life breath of man comes through the nose also. So there's a lot of significance with it. So it is very important. That being said, here's what happened, and this is the beginning of when Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai begins to speak. Okay, so Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai awakes at this point and understands that a person enters the cave And he understands that the awakening that happened in the upper realms and in the lower realms requires that a special person has to enter into the room for this to be able to happen, because this doesn't happen ever/often. So he understands that there's something very special happening here. And he begins and he speaks, and this is where I'm going to start reading a little bit. So he says over here, what is the name of the tzadik that is the pillar of all the worlds, that gave him the permission? It has to be like that, don't worry about it, because now we're about to actually get into the fire of it. So we have to, everybody wake up.
It's no more.
Let's start again. He says over here, what is the name of the tzaddik that is the pillar of all the worlds, that gave him the permission to ignite the lights of the palace of the king, and these lights enlighten the whole palace itself, and I'm sensing this person descend into the cave. He starts like this. Okay? There's a lot of concepts of light, cave, palace of the king. All of this stuff is a reference to Hashem. So whenever I can, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And we're going to discuss this. The lights, by the way, are also referenced to, not only we discuss the field and the plants, but also lights are also the nishamot of Bnei Israel. So when he's saying who has the right, that who is the one that enlightens the world and enlightens the palace of the king, is the one that enlightens the nishamot of Bnei Israel. Who is the one that opens up the heart of all the nishamot of Am Yisrael? Who's the one that's the pillar that allows for that light to exist in the world? That's what Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is saying. It's not just a simple sentence. It's going through sod of the experience that he's saying. With just one simple sentence, you can write books or just about one little sentence that he's saying. He continues, I bless you. You are welcome here. Who is this tzaddik? Does he carry the quality of a man that doesn't concentrate for one moment on himself? That he is truly humble? That he is the son of the Kudsha Berichu and the Shekhinah? In the Kabbalah, Kudsha Berichu is the reference to the masculine aspect of Hashem, and the Shekhinah is a reference to the feminine aspect of Hashem. For those that study a little bit more into the Kabbalah, that is a reference to Ze'er Anpin, the masculine, and the Malchut and Nukva is the Shekhinah. Okay? So essentially, the tzaddik is essentially the son of Hashem. That he has the force and the strength to be able to descend into the mud and the dirt, which is the aspect of the people's sins, the dirtiness that we do in the world. And he maintains and he elevates the Shekhinah, because the Shekhinah itself also descends into the dirt and into the impurity. It says that the Jews, whenever they went to Egypt, the Shekhinah is also in exile. Today we are in exile and the Shekhinah is in exile. Part of the reason why we do Leshem Yechud when we do a tefillah, whenever we're doing this, which is a mystical prayer, but it's also a very simple prayer, when we're saying that we're combining the letters of Yud, Hey, and then eventually Vav, and then Hey, we're combining the feminine aspects of Hashem and the masculine aspects of Hashem. When we do a mitzvah, we're combining and we're reuniting Hashem, the masculine aspect of Hashem, with the feminine aspect of Hashem. That's what the Kedusha and all the different things, mystically speaking, we're doing when we do a holy act. We're allowing for the unification of Hashem's feminine and masculine aspects to be together, which by definition is also why it's such a powerful mitzvah when a man and a woman procreate in the right way, that they allow for Kedusha to enter into the world. That's how blessing comes into the world. Same way that when there's a coupling up there of spiritual realms, of masculine and feminine, they also bring down blessing into the world. And that's the concept of Mein Duchin and Mein Nukvin, the upper waters and the lower waters, and the unifications of the waters that are joining, one's a masculine and one's a feminine, and bringing it back up. So when he's talking over here about the Shekhinah, the dirt, the feminine aspect, it's that she's exiled and we have to bring her back and beautify her in front of Hashem. To continue, he says, is this tzaddik able to know all the healings and all the remedies of the daughter of the king? The daughter of the king can either be a reference to the Shekhinah, or it can be Am Yisrael, exactly. Which is essentially saying that this person, this tzaddik, to be able to enter into the cave, he knows all the healings of all of Am Yisrael. He knows how to heal the soul of any single person that comes to him. He knows how to repair every single neshama, and he knows how to be able to help bring them all back to Hashem. And that all this tzaddik work is to be with the daughter of the king and speak to her beautiful words and console her and take care of her and reinforce her. Remember how we talked about last week, how we talked about how the neshama of Rebbe Nachman comes into the world to be able to help. He doesn't come here to tell you all the negative things you've done. There's no judgment. He just helps you come back to Hashem. He helps you make you look good in front of Hashem. He helps tell you that you can believe in yourself, that you can come back, that you can do tshuva. We'll get into that in just a little bit. And he does everything to remove all her suffering. He sees if she has any wounds, any pains, any scars, and he heals all of them with every single healing that exists. Does this tzaddik have the quality of a person that doesn't pay attention to his own desires, that his hands are dirtied with blood in order to purify the woman for her husband? This is a concept of nida. By the way, we're in a period right now, mystically speaking, to be able to enter back and give you a couple more ideas. It says in the books of the Arizal that the Jews, when they were in Egypt, they were compared to a woman that was in her 7-day cycle of nida. Now we exit because we were in such a deep form of impurity. The Jews went through a 7-week period, which is 7 times 749. The Sfirat HaOmer is a 7-week purification of Nida. We're purifying our neshamot to be able to accept the Torah because of the level of impurity that we were in when we were in Egypt. So it shows you that this is also compared also to the woman and the process that she has to go to be able to purify herself, but also the whole neshamot of all of Bnei Israel, purifying themselves during this period of time. And he says that he dirties himself and he allows himself to be able to go into the depths to be able to help purify, to bring the woman back to her husband, which is the Shekhinah to Hashem and the Jews back to Hashem. Okay? Now, in reality, there's a lesson of the Kutiman that discusses that there's a level of a tzadik, which he's talking about himself, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and very special holy tzadikim, that even when they descend into the depths of darkness, they don't get impure. He says many other tzadikim, they'll descend, and the Satan and the evil forces will impurify them in some way. They'll have losses. But the tzadik I met, the tzadik Hador, the tzadik Yesod Olam, the one that's Bechinat Moshe Rabbeinu, he can descend into darkness and he ascends purely. That's why Rabbi Akiva was able to ascend and he was able to ascend in peace and come out in peace because he has this concept. He continues, does this tzaddik have the quality of making all his work to dig into the earth and to toil to find the source of water? Now here's a very deep concept as well. Water, we know Rebbe Nachman is Nachal Noveh Mekor Chochmah. But water, when he's talking about ma'ayanot, because he uses the word ma'ayanot over here, he's talking about sources of water. The sources of water that give water in the desert. So he's saying to all the Jews that have despair, that don't have a single place to go when it's the heat of the sun and the Yetzer Hara and there's the snakes and the scorpions and you're lost and you don't know where civilization is, he gives water and he provides Torah and he provides advice and he gives consolation to every single Jew that requires that water. The water of Miriam when you were in the desert. That equation. And this is the water to be able to purify man from all his stains and all his filth. Can this tzaddik be the source of all good scents and aromas to bring back to life any man that lost life? There's a concept of life in the world because there's people that are dead, and there's people that are alive that are dead also. The Zohar discusses it. There's people that are dead that are alive. The Zohar discusses that too. Why? It says Moshe Rabbeinu lo met. Why? Because tzadikim don't actually pass away. They don't actually die. Their physical body leaves, but in reality the tzadikim are always alive. So is this the person that could bring back the people to life? We know that Rebbe Nachman spent most of his life, the mature part of his life at least, rectifying neshamot of Am Yisrael, both dead and also alive. Thousands of them every single day. That was while he was alive. He said, I could do more once I pass away. He says, can this tzaddik be the source of all good sense and aromas to bring back any life to a man that lost life? And not only bring back life, but also to clothe the soul with 24 kinds of jewelry to bring her before her husband so that he will love her and he will accept her. This is back to the concept of nidah, that the man is beautified, that we had the concept with the women in the midbar and in the desert whenever the women wore and they had all these beautiful things that came down to them. The Midrash says that the man came down not just as food, it also brought down jewelry for the women so that they could beautify themselves to be with their husbands. This is the concept of the Shekhinah being beautified and being cleaned to be with the Kudsha Berichu. So that it comes out, and this is the rectification of sin, to remove all the negative things. He says, can this tzaddik do this? Can it dress the clothing of the neshamot with these 24 kinds of jewels? Moshe, do you want to share something on that, by the way?
I think there's a Gemara Masechet Shabbat, which discusses an idea that it says that Chava, she was poisoned by the snake with 24 types of poison. Obviously, Chava represents the divine presence. She represents Am Yisrael. She's the mother of all Am Yisrael. But it said about Chava that she was poisoned by the Nachash with 24 types of poison. And that's why on Shavuot, it's very important to spend the entire night reading certain passages from each of the 24 books of Tanakh. That's why the Arizal set out something called Tikkun Leil Shavuot. It's the Tikkun, it's the rectification on the night of Shavuot. When a person stays up all night to study, he has to read certain, it's like the first 3 psukim and the last 3 psukim of every single parasha of the 5 books, plus Nevi'im and Ktuvim, and all these books, and all these things. There's a certain thing, you could look it up in any book, really. And that's to repair each and every poison with the 24 types of jewels, which is the Torah. So the Torah here is saying, the tzaddik is, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai is saying here also, the tzaddik has the power to restore the 24 types of jewels to this person. Because we can also say in the Gemara, it says, how foolish is the person for that he stands up for the Sefer Torah, but not for a Talmid Chacham. Meaning the tzaddik, the Talmid Chacham, represents the Torah in its entirety. So when the tzaddik is portraying Torah, he's giving all the remedies, all the 24 books, everything, all the jewels back to the person. So he's restoring life And it says, when we got to Har Sinai, immediately the filth stopped of Am Yisrael. Why? Because the Torah was the complete rectification for all that filth that we got from the Nachash. So there's lots going on here.
Didn't Rabbi Nachman say that we should burn his books before when he passes away?
Yeah. When he passed away, he told one of his students to burn a set of books that he had. But
Particular books or
He
all
bu-
of his writings?
Some of the things, because
Get a
some of the
chest
things
of
that
writings.
some of the things that he had, a lot of the books that we have at Rebbe Nachman of Breslev, I'll say one little point on this. Everything that we have at Rebbe Nachman today that exists is not of the degree of understanding of Rebbe Nachman's level. It's for the rectification of Bnei Israel. Meaning that, and I said this one time in the class, any book that you read of any tzaddik, when their author, even this happens very obviously with secular books, if you're reading any book, if you read even whatever type of book you're reading, a book on psychology, you're reading the knowledge and the wisdom of an author that they're sharing information with you about their understanding of a subject. That's true with even books of Torah. Except Rabbi Nachman didn't share with us his wisdom in his books. Because if we had the books, the only two books that we had of the true level of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev are burnt and we don't have them at all. And he said even those books, he says even the Mashiach is going to understand a little bit of those books. Now,
Just one thing.
Yeah.
In one of these two books, he said that the smoke from burning the book has more power than the book itself. The smoke from the burning of the book.
there's, in reality, the truth is that the books that we have of Rebbe Nachman of Breslev, they're meant to come into the world as healings. Obviously, they contain the aspect of the emet of Hashem and the emet of the tzadik, but people mistakenly think that it's an author sharing his wisdom with us. It's not just a basic translation of that. So the truth is that it's really the will of Hashem to have these books here and to help rectify the souls of Am Yisrael. If we wanted to see the level of Moshe of even, that's why I say no one really understands the Zohar, because to understand the Zohar you have to understand the author, and no one understands the author because no one understands the level. Same thing with the Arizal. I tell people all the time, no one really understands the level of the Arizal. No one can read books of Arizal and understand the depth of the Arizal. People today try it, they read it, but they don't know the Arizal. So it's the same thing. People today read and they think they understand Likutei Moharan, and sometimes people will come up and, especially people that are not Breslev, will come up and they'll be like, I learned this lesson of Likutei Moharan, this is, I understood this. I'd be like, I really don't understand anything at all. But in reality, the truth is that nobody understands a single word on the page of what Likutei Moharan, because it's equated also to the Zohar. And it's the same thing, you open it up and you don't understand. The only difference is that Rabbi Nachman made his writing in a way that it returned back to the source, in the sense that, aside from the fact that he says it's emet lamito, the words that are written there, they can be understood in the deepest forms of Kabbalah, and they can also be understood to a 3-year-old that wants to be able to get close to Hashem, and a parent is trying to teach them little midot. Be simcha all day. Study Shulchan Aruch. Learn with absolute simplicity. Have strong emunah. Go to the mikveh. He speaks with a language that's childish purposefully. And Rabbi Natan does that as well. Because within the simplest concepts is the biggest sophistication and the most detailed secrets.
But that's the level where he reached, being that he could take something so very high and bring it so very low. That's what determines the tzaddik. The fact that he's able to draw something so low. Why is the Baal Shem Tov so big? What's Chassidut about? To bring all the secrets that no one understood in the Zohar, and through stories explaining this. Sipurei Masiot, the book of Rabbi Nachman's tales, which are stories. That's the highest perception of books that we have of his.
Because no one understands that at all.
But it's clothed in a story. It's one of the lowest, we could say,
It seems like just like a regular story that you could tell anybody about a princess.
So Rabbi
About
Nachman
7 beggars.
So Rabbi Nachman said, I perceive my Torah tens of thousands of levels higher than anyone else. And I gave you my psolet. I gave you my scraps. So to understand Likutei Moharan as being his scraps is a level that's...
And also to comment and piggyback off what Moshe is saying, to understand also, if you pick up and you read and you open up Likutei Moharan, the quotes and the sources that Rabbi Nachman uses, the vast knowledge that Rabbi Nachman had to be able to bring and quote from across all of Tanakh and all of Torah and all Sifrei Kedusha is incredible. When you open up a book of Likutei Moharan, you read immediately, you understand that immediately he was a master of Kabbalah. But he didn't show that, so people don't know. When people, basically today, a lot of rabbis and other people that discuss Rabbi Nachman, they don't make it seem like he was a mekubal, because he didn't come off that way. But like we said, one of the manuscripts and one of the things that Rabbi Natan had been burning, one time Rabbi Natan had a piece of paper that he read. And on the piece of paper he read, It was a sod, it was a piece of Kabbalah that was the sod of how to never ever have to eat again. How to rectify your neshama. It doesn't require food to exist in the world. There's people that reach a level that they didn't need to eat. Moshe Rabbeinu was an example of that. Many tzadikim did that. Rebbe Nachman did that for a lot of part of his life. But there was a piece of paper, it was a special rectification, it's a process where you do something, it enlightens a certain part of the soul if a person's on the right level, and they don't ever need to eat again. It's not natural, but it's the way it is. Also, the splitting of the sea is not natural, but there's a way that things can happen in the world. Rabbi Natan read it, his desire to eat had completely left him. Rabbi Nachman took the piece of paper and burnt it. He said, this no one can have. So the truth is that there's lots of things like that. There's lots and lots of stories, but that's just a simple example. So people don't understand, they don't think Rabbi Nachman was a mekubal. They thought he was like a hippie, give a little piece of advice, be happy, meditate for 5 minutes, but people don't understand the degree of what we're discussing. So that's why I give a little anecdote. And up until what we just discussed here was all Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai speaking. Rabbi Nachman didn't say a single word. And now we're going to talk, and now Rabbi Nachman is going to answer. Everyone ready? Spacesuits required for this part. When Rebbe Nachman began to speak, and now he began to utter again, wonderful odors started to come back out again in the cave. He started to resense again all these different types of smells and all these different types of beautiful ambiances that were existing in the higher worlds and in the lower worlds. And then he starts to talk like this with immense joy and immense blessing, and he starts saying, "It is me who has come down into this cave, and my name is Nachman ben Simcha and Fege. And I am the great-grandson of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and I descend directly from King David." Immediately he starts off with that. "And I am the one who can unite the upper worlds and the lower worlds. I am the one with the quality that can console the Shekhinah and take care of the Shekhinah so that she can be with her husband, essentially the Kudsha B'Rechu et Hashem. I am the one that has all the healings and all the remedies to help heal the daughter, because he had asked him about are you the one that can heal the daughter, which is essentially bring back all the neshamot of Yisrael to Hashem. I have the power to rectify the 10 arrows from the 10 sins and the poisons instituted by the snake. In the last story of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, in the 7 beggars, or of Rabbi Nachman, in the 6th one, there's a very long part of the story where it discusses these arrows being sent with poison. And there's a lot of deep secrets behind it. But this is a reference to that. Because he says, and this is where Tikkun HaKlali essentially stems from, because there's 10 types of song that rectify these 10 different types of maladies and different types of illnesses that exist in the world. And it's rectified because it comes from the Satan. And he can rectify all of them. I have the power to rectify these 10 arrows and these 10 sins and the poison instituted by the snake. Not only can I take off these 10, but I can throw the arrows back at the Yetzer Hara. And it will vomit out all the good that it took from us. And I can wait till the final drop will come out from its neck, and that it will be taken back for us. There's a lesson in Likutei Moharan that discusses how the Satan swallows all the tefillot and all the good deeds of Bnei Israel, the ones that don't have the proper machshavot and the proper aspects to be able to rise up. And in the end, the tzaddik has to be able to go into the throat of the Satan and do shchita to the Yetzer Hara and remove and accept back and bring back all the tefillot and all the good deeds that everything that all the people have. That's the power of being able to be connected to a tzaddik, because the tzaddik always goes and helps and regains all the things that you lost. When you have someone that's looking out for your hashava aveda, the items that you've lost, then you have a person that's able to be able to return those items back. That's the concept of being attached to a tzaddik.
What's the difference when you read this between the tzaddik asod olam and the Mashiach?
It's a good question.
Mashiach needs the tzadik asod olam.
Okay.
There's a story which, maybe I'll jump into this in a second. Yeah, I'm going to jump into, you know what, I'll share a little story on it. I'm going to share it only in little parts of it because I don't remember it completely, but I'll share with you the parts that I do remember. Rebbe Nachman continues. He says, I have the quality to reinforce the weak people, the ones that receive pain and attack from the Yetzer Hara, the snake. And while the snake has bruised every bone of the soul from head to toe, and while there is despair that they cannot do tshuva, and the Yetzer Hara does everything to make us believe that we cannot do tshuva at all, my job is to give everybody the chokhmah and the binah and the desire of happiness in their hearts. Because only through happiness will there be able to be a true tshuva. We discussed happiness earlier. And I will show them a true path, a path that brings about happiness and dedication so that they will accomplish all of the Torah. And I'm the one that has all these qualities. I know all the world depends on me because I'm the guarantor of the Kudsha B'Rechu. Because he created the world and I stood before him and I told him to create the world and I will take responsibility of even every single sin. There's a story that's brought down that Rebbe Nachman shared that before the world was created, Hashem had consulted, and there was this process before the world was going to be created where he didn't know if he was going to be able to do it because of the concept of tshuva. There was a back and forth with angels. We discussed the other midrash that discussed the emet lamito and emet, and how Hashem threw an angel to the earth and then a new emet was birthed from the earth, the concept of tshuva and the concept of the tzadik. We know that the worlds that existed before this world didn't have the concept of the tzadik. But when he was saying this, not one neshama came out to be able to guarantee for Bnei Israel. Rebbe Nachman said, I came out from under the kisei hakavod of Hashem, and I said, I will be the guarantor of Bnei Israel. I will make sure. So every single person needs to understand, Rabbi Natan says this, that any person, I believe, he says that any person needs to understand that whenever a person is doing something wrong, or a person does a sin, God forbid, or a person feels distant from Hashem, the tzaddik is doing one thing and one thing only. He's going to collect every single thing from Am Yisrael, whether the person believes in him or they don't, whether they talk bad about him, whether they don't, whether the person understands or they don't. The tzaddik, he goes and he collects everything. Why? Because he's the guarantor of Hashem. And then all the evil angels and the Satan and the Yetzer Hara come and they say, you have to pay up for this thing and all this thing and all the negative things that a person did. And what does the tzaddik do? He says, wait. And he keeps on paying him off because the tzaddik has zechuyot. And he says, wait, because he's the one that guarantees everything. And then the Mashiach, when the Mashiach had come in front of Hashem and was saying that I could not guarantee that he can do the work, Rebbe Nachman said, I will guarantee it, and then he will come. And he will have to come, and he will come and pass through my kever before he reveals himself.
Rebbe Nachman said, I've set up a Shulchan Aruch for the Mashiach. This table right now, that we see is completely set, that's what he set up. The Mashiach, he said, the only difference between the Mashiach and I, there is no difference. The only thing is that everyone's going to believe the Mashiach. No one believes me. So we see, it's the same idea, it's the same neshama, it's the same
Sorry for that.
that the Mashiach and Rebbe Nachman, they're one thing.
But that's why it's the same concept of Moshe Rabbeinu as well. That's why it also says, there's a reference to this in the Gemara, but people don't like to talk about it because obviously it's very difficult to understand. But the neshama Moshe Rabbeinu comes back in every generation in a form of nitzot, in a form of kedusha. That's why in one of the prayers that we do, whenever we do as Connect as Breslovers, one of the things that we do is we do, and I did it before we started the class, we do the Ha'ani Mikasher Atzmi. We connect the real tzadikim and also the tzadik of the generation, the tzadikim that are in the generation. Because in reality, these nishamot, if you read the books of the Arizal, for example, if you read, like we said, we don't really understand much, but for the basic understanding that we have, which is a broken understanding, when you read Shara Gilgulim and you read the gates of reincarnation and you understand that everything that's happening in the world, reincarnation after ibur, there's tzadikim that are inhabiting in the world. There's tzadikim that are coming down right now. There's tzadikim that are in this room that we cannot understand. There's angels in this room that we cannot understand and cannot witness. There's nishamot of tzadikim that are coming down when you're going to do a mitzvah. The Arizal explains in the concept of an ibur that if a person wants to go do a very powerful mitzvah with a lot of love and a lot of avat Hashem, and maybe even a lot of yirat Hashem, then he has the capacity, if his soul is holy, to be able to have a tzaddik come down and participate and help that neshama. And the tzaddik could stay with him for a very long time, for many years even. And a person could have the neshama of a tzaddik be within him and dwell within him. So there's so many things that we cannot understand at all in any capacity. But these neshamot keep on coming back, just the same way that there's evil forces that exist in the world, and there's the Yetzer Hara, that every single person has an evil temptation every 10 seconds in the world to talk bad, speak bad, do something bad, do this, eat without thinking, or to eat in a form of impurity, or whatever type of sin that a person might do in any capacity in thought, speech, action. So too, tzadikim are existing and are alive today and are working with us every single second of the day and are alive today and praying for us. Rachel Imenu, all the imaot, all the avot, they're working to help bring the Mashiach and support us and help us. And we need to understand that and believe that with 100% of our capacity. So this is very important to understand. That's why we talk a lot about tzadikim. And at this point, when Rebbe Nachman finished saying this, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai heard this, and he got up to warmly greet Rebbe Nachman of Breslev. And he said after that, he said, now that I heard all of this, he said, now who's going to sing? What? Yeah.
Miron.
Exactly. So he said, who's going to sing? There's a concept in the Zohar that's discussed that there's this 70 different facets of the Torah and there's 70 different types of facets that bring a person into tshuva. And Rebbe Nachman, because that's the reference to the song, because there's a song also that's referenced in the Zohar, Rebbe Nachman talks about it as well, it's the song of the Mashiach. He says, I will sing. Rabbeinu responds to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai. And then at that moment, all the tzadikim that were not currently there, and all the upper angels and all the other people from the upper worlds, and the people that were passed away and the people that were alive, all the neshamot came to the cave. And they came to hear this moment. And he took with him an instrument, which over here they translate to essentially as a kinor, which people say is either like a harp or violin. that Rabbi Nachman had as a musical instrument that he was carrying with him. And he started to begin to play. And as he began to play, it started to pierce all the realms of the upper worlds and the lower worlds as well. And at this point, a heavenly voice came out and said, Rabbi Nachman ben Fege ben Simcha, my beautiful loyal servant, the servant of Hashem, my only eye, he says specifically over here in translation, which is a reference to a concept in the Zohar that says that had I only had one eye, it would be essentially enough, discussing something that's very valuable to Hashem. Something that is the only thing that a person desires, the only thing that a person needs. He says that the breath of air and the spirit of God is within you. We talk about how Paro said to Yosef, I believe, that it says, Ish asher ruach Elokim bo. That is the concept that a man that is a true tzadik is the man that has the spirit of Hashem within him. So he says over here, the spirit is within you. Your spirit is fixed and stands strong in the world. And for you I say, my precious son, my firstborn son, my Bechor, it is upon you that Israel will be glorified. And I will accomplish from the earth and all the galaxies. All my kings and all my rulers under me hereby give permission to you to start singing. And this was the heavenly voice of Hashem that was speaking in the room. And at this point, he begins to play a song. And at this point, nobody, over here, there's a note that says that no one knows what the song was, because no one else was in the room, and Rabbi Nachman didn't reveal what the song was, because he says this is a song that comes from 10 types of melodies, which is the song that is the song of the Mashiach. So some people in Breslov Chassidut, Nanachs, will say that this is the Nanach, essentially the concept of Nanach. Some people will say that this might have been different types of concept. Nanach. And that's that. That's the Mesorah that we have. And when he began to sing, he started to begin to repair the roots of all souls. And he started beginning to do a tikkun for every single person. He's saying even people that die on Kiddush Hashem, which is one of the highest levels of neshamot, that doesn't necessarily need to be 100% rectified. But he said even those neshamot that need to be rectified, because there's some things that need to sometimes be cleansed, which we cannot understand the level of people that die al pi Kiddush Hashem 100%. There's a rectification up there. And he said this song of the reparation of the world, there was never an experience like this from the beginning of time, from when Adam was created until this moment right now. This song that he began to sing. And he began to sing and play. And at this point, his face started to shine with an abundant light. And his face started to shine so incredibly that immediately everybody else started to get a little bit scared. And then other people then started, because it was very powerful light and an awestruck light, that other people started to sing with him. And everybody started dancing in with him. And in this moment was revealed to him something very special. And this was the tikkun of Rosh Hashanah. The tikkun of being able to go as a group to be able to go to the tzadik on Rosh Hashanah. The inyan of Rosh Hashanah was revealed to him in the cave of Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai. And this energy that he received when he received the tikkun of Rosh Hashanah in this moment was so elevated that he says that he completely lost all his energy and he could barely play anymore the music and he couldn't sing anymore. When he saw this, and Rebbe Nachman and Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai both had this revelation of what the tikkun of Rosh Hashanah is, which is essentially the tikkun of the original sin, which is the beginning of the world, which is the rectification of everything. In this moment, when they stood together, Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai and Rebbe Nachman, it says that Hashem couldn't resist anymore seeing the connection of these two tzadikim. We know that Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai was so well connected with Rebbe Nachman that Rebbe Nachman says that I came down into the world also because my neshama came down at this specific time, because Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai was the one that was most worthy and the one that was praying for me the most to come down. That's why Rebbe Nachman and Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai are very well connected. Other than the introduction to Likutei Moharan, they were very well connected because they were already connected from a long time before this. And when Hashem couldn't resist anymore seeing them, he said to you both my treasures, and for all that I see, right now I'm going to reveal to you every single treasure and every single secret that I have in the world. When he saw their unification of Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai and Rebbe Nachman. And in that moment it says, and he writes, that not a single angel, not a single seraph, not a single neshama, not a person from the beginning of time till the end of time saw what Hashem gifted them in that moment. Them too. After this, another melody began to come out, and we're at the end of it. Rebbe Shimon bar Yochai immediately asked Rebbe Nachman, when this last melody came out, it was a very bitter and powerful cry and scream. And when it came out, he said, what is this bitter cry? What is this bitter scream that's coming out in the world? And Rebbe Nachman says, I'll tell you what this is. It's the young people, it's these people that they lost their animals. They lost their animals. And he says they lost them in the fields and in the forest. and they can't find water, so they continue to stroll. And they eventually find themselves in the desert, and they start looking in the desert and they can't find water. So they continue to search, and then there's savage animals that come out into the desert, and they come and they kill a lot of the animals. And a lot of them get very harmed, and they get mangled and they get destroyed by these wild beasts in the desert, these animals that belong to the shepherds and they belong to the regular people. And then there's a few of them that get to escape, and they go out and they cry because they barely make it, because they're saying, where is the water? I can't get any water, and they're barely surviving. He says the cry that you're hearing is the cry that comes from these animals. This is a reference, he says, to all the nishamot that go and they descend and they go into the concept of the desert, as we discussed earlier, that they get destroyed by the Yetzirah, they get destroyed by their sins, that they don't believe that they can do tshuva. That some of the people, they get so far away that they don't ever think that they're ever going to come back, that they don't believe in Hashem, that they don't think anything is ever possible. And he said some of them get away and they're completely destroyed, and some of them get away and they're okay. And all the ones that get away, they start to begin to pray and they begin to cry. And he said, where's the water? Where's the source? Where's the mayan? Where's the nachal noveh mikol chochmah? And he says they call out to the shepherd because they need to give something to drink. And he says, I'm the one that's able to give them to drink. Because this is essentially also the future cry. He showed him the cries of the time of the Mashiach. And now Rebbe Nachman says to Rebbe Shimon he says, now that you've seen this revelation of Rosh Hashanah, and that he had the sod of Rosh Hashanah, he says, in the future, I see that they're going to block people from being able to come to my kever. So I want to make a pact with you, because you and I are very close. He says, I need to ask of you a favor. He said, okay. And he said to him, can you accept, for people that cannot come to me on Rosh Hashanah, can you accept them at your grave? And can you accept their tefillot, and can you accept their cries, and can you accept their prayers, and bring them to me, because I know what to do with them? Can you accept them, and can you do achnasat ochim? Could you accept them with kind words and a smile, and accept them with love? And Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai agreed. That's why Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai and Rebbe Nachman are so well connected that Rebbe Nachman said, even to his daughter, whenever one of them had gone to Israel, and he said even to other people, he said, if you can't make it to me, go to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai. He said, because I'm there too. He said, me and him are the same. And after this melody came out, they started dancing and singing again together. It said that the 7 ushpizin came in to the room to dance and sing with them. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo. The Mashiach came in, and all the great tzadikim. It said on this day, there was a joy as if the Beit HaMikdash had been rebuilt. And after this, all the people, and this is how it ends. It says, Rebbe Nachman says, as this ended, he said, everybody present, the angels, the people, all the nishamot, they began to give me gifts as I began to walk out of the cave. And I left with all the gifts. And that's how the story ends.
Can we unbuckle the seat belts or?
With that being said, to give a little bit more kavod to Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, and I know that we've already gone for a little bit over, I want to, you don't want to go into it a little bit?
It's long. We'll do it another time.
Do you want to share some other points then? You know what we'll maybe do, because we're anyways on the concept of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai and the tzaddik, maybe next week with the help of God, we'll share, because I didn't want to miss any details. What we'll do is next week, God willing, Moshe will share with you guys the story, the full story of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai's passing, so that people could understand. And this, and the stories of Rebbe Nachman Abrasav, you always understand from the classes that we come to, there's a lot of very simple and good takeaways, and you feel very good because you know exactly how to work on yourself, because all of the avodah, even whenever we study a parasha, or whenever we study something from the parasha of the week, we always study things that work on our midot. One of the famous books that Rebbe Nachman wrote, which he started compiling at the age of 6 years old, we discussed last week, is Sefer HaMidot, the book of working on your character traits. In reality, the work that a person does on their character is the most important. We learn to be able to apply. It's not just learning for chokhmah. Hashem makes some people wiser. He makes some people have more heart. He makes some people that have a capacity to make more money. He makes some people have different types of skill sets. Everybody's special in their own capacity. That's what's so beautiful about never judging another Jew, because everybody has a special piece of what they need to do in the world. And Rebbe Nachman understood that. So walking into the room, and this is, I think, unfortunately, a very big issue that occurs a lot in the school system today, is that everybody, and it's not an issue towards school teacher or educators, it's that the system itself is broken, because everybody needs to follow the system where, like, the smartest grade and the best grade on this test makes you an A, and everybody feels like this person's the best. But unfortunately in life, it's not the only qualifications that we have to people. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the time that there's people that might not have the best midot, might not do it. And there also might be people that have great midot and also get very good grades. And maybe they're lacking in something else, but everybody has to rectify something. The beauty of being able to look at a single person and recognize that everybody has something special that they have to do in this world and work on it in every single capacity, that you can sit down and you can learn the sod of the parasha, and then you can connect it back to how to work on your midot and how to judge people well and do azamra and do the teachings of Rebbe Nachman and Breslov. Everything is very applicable. Next week, though, you will have the impression whenever you're hearing the stories of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai passing away, and when you read sections of the Zohar, you will realize that while there's a lot of things that are not very applicable, it is incredibly deep and incredibly powerful. So for those that have the capacity and for those that would like to come and learn a little bit of Zohar next week, God willing, if Moshe will do it, then we'll go into the in-depth story about how Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai passed away. And it's not just like that a person like this special passes away. Moshe will go into it, but the details of the house being surrounded by fire, people coming to the room, angels being to embark over here, the experiences with the Malach HaMavet, the experiences with the angel of death. Whenever, before, many years before, I don't know if it was many years before, whenever his student Rabbi Yitzchak, one of the main 10, had come into the room and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had experienced the Malach HaMavet walking right behind Rabbi Yitzchak, and he told the Malach HaMavet and he directed him to sit him outside and handcuff him to the outside of the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. People don't understand the capacity of what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is. Today we have a much more diluted version of revelation of God in the world. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, no one can sit down with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You know that. Even in the time when the story is going to be revealed that Moshe is going to share with you, people couldn't enter the room. It was only on request. No one ever sat down with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Even Rabbi Nachman, by the way, a lot of people don't know this. Rabbi Nachman never sat down with people unless they were married. He said he considered them as if they were children in front of him. It doesn't matter how holy the person was. The person could be literally a mekubal, 18 years old, knowing all of the Torah kula. Rabbi Nachman would not sit with him. There were people that were not even able to sit with Rabbi Nachman and enter into his room at all. People only sat down and would chase the students of Rabbi Nachman after they had an experience with Rabbi Nachman. People would go to Rabbi Natan and say, what did he tell you? What did he do this? What was the Torah that he just revealed to you? That's it. Nobody ever understood really the degree of some of these holy people. People didn't have the capacity to be able to approach Moshe Rabbeinu.
I think there's a foundational point of this entire story. And all that we just read is maybe just for one idea. It's to realize how big the tzaddik is. And that there's a necessary component of going to develop a connection with this person that we're trying to reconnect to. Because the truth is, he's the root of our soul. The tzaddik, Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Moshe Rabbeinu is the father of Am Yisrael. Why? Because he's the one who brought them out of Egypt. So if Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who brought them out of Galut, he's the one that's the father. So the Arizal explains that literally they were drawn from the same place, Am Yisrael and Moshe Rabbeinu. But they needed Moshe Rabbeinu to really connect to Hashem Yitbarach. It's the only route. So this story is coming to show us one very big thing. Is not only Uman Rosh Hashanah and a lot of other things we're studying here. It's to develop the connection with the tzaddik. Because tzaddik is the main idea. It's the treasure of Hashem. We say, Ve'ruach Elokim merachefet al penei hamayim. In the first few psukim of Bereshit, it says the spirit of Hashem was hovering above the waters. You know what many tzaddikim say? Rabbi Yosef says that this was the soul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the soul of Rabbi Nachman. These tzaddikim, they're the treasure of Hashem. They're the sight of Hashem. It's the one thing that Hashem looks at and says, because of him we'll bring back Am Yisrael. So, all the advice of Rabbi Nachman, all the advice of Rabbi Shimon, all the advice of the Ari HaKadosh, and all the holy books, it's all dependent upon one thing. You can try to apply as much as you want to the advice, but it's not worth anything unless you develop the connection with the tzaddik. Because the tzaddik is going to be the one to draw you closer. So, Rabbi Nachman once said, he had his students around him at a table, and he told his students, there's 3 types of students of mine. There's one that eats from my plate. There's one that's engraved, that I'm engraved in his heart. But the most precious of all is the one that's engraved in my heart. And I want all of you guys to be engraved in my heart. Mm-hmm. So there's something here more important than all the study that you want and all the thing. It's sometimes to say, Hareni mikasher atzmi. I want to bind myself to the tzaddik. Let me attach myself to the tzaddik. Let me go to Uman. Let me go to Meron. Let me go and attach myself to the tzaddik, because the truth is, he's the Mashiach of his time. He is the Or of the Mashiach. He's the light of the Mashiach. He's going to draw all of Am Yisrael closer. And Rabbi Nachman, before he went to Eretz Yisrael, it says that he couldn't sleep. In Sichot Haran, he writes the 600,000 nishamot, or the 600,000 letters of the Torah would pass before his eyes. He couldn't sleep all night. The entire Torah was flashing before him. Obviously, the Zohar writes that the 600,000 letters represent the 600,000 nishamot. So Rabbi Nachman's preparing putting all the 600,000 neshamot together. And at the end of his life, he got to the level of saying, Gamarti ve'egmor natzachti ve'anatzeach. I have finished, I will finish. I have accomplished, and I will accomplish. Meaning the job's done. There's nothing else to do. The Mashiach is going to come, and he's just going to put a few things together. But we see Rabbi Nachman putting everything together. We see Rabbi Shimon. You see how many people are coming closer to Hashem. We were saying the biggest miracle, there was a beautiful story. Yochai was once telling me of Rabbi Yitzhak Breiter, a big Breslever Chassid in Eastern Europe around the time of the Holocaust. He once had someone come to him, and this person that came to him started bragging about how big his Rebbe was, how big his teacher was. And Rabbi Yitzhak Breiter started laughing, and he said, no matter how big your Rebbe is, I will still always stick to my Rebbe. Even if your Rebbe were to come to me and to lift someone out of the ground, I wouldn't be impressed. Because you know what's the biggest miracle? The fact that I was such a lowly person and I'm the person I am today. That's the biggest miracle. Rebbe Nachman once said, you know how easy it is to revive the dead? How hard is it to revive one living soul? And look at all of us here gathered around the table studying the teachings of Rebbe Nachman and Breslev, even just to hear a word. But it comes to show you the power of the tzadik's teachings and the fact that he's still alive and that he's still working and that he's still doing things. Gamarti ve'egmor, I will finish. Anatzeach, I will accomplish, I will win. So these things aren't stopping. Rabbeinu is only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is why we see people have machloket and this and that, because the more the tzaddik works, the bigger the yetzer hara, the bigger the machloket. So don't get distraught by it, don't get turned off by it, because the truth is, you know it's working whenever you start to see the yetzer hara is really starting to attack you. So, B'ezrat Hashem, may we make it to Uman also, and to connect to the tzaddik and come close to Hashem.
Amen.
So how often can we do Tikkun Klali only on Saturday night? No.
Every day, any time of the
Any
day.
particular time of the day?
Any time of the day, at any time, with anyone. And
It
this,
has to be another person?
no, you could do it by yourself. You could do it whenever you want. There's no limit to it. You could do it literally at any time.
But you said that even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai couldn't say, wait, even Rabbi Nachman couldn't say Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You said that, and how was he so close with him?
How is he so close to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai?
That you said you can't even sit with him.
What do you mean you can't sit with him?
No,
When did I say that?
Did he get invited or something?
I think Rabbi Shimon, he was saying that people like Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Shimon, they wouldn't allow certain people to sit next to them.
Oh,
Meaning
yes.
not-
Yeah. So people like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Nachman, because their neshamot were so holy, it's not just anyone that could enter into the room to be sitting with them. So that's what I was saying, that some people had to have permission to be able to enter.
So Rabbi Nachman couldn't walk in Rabbi Shimon's room?
No, they lived at different times. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived at the time of the 2nd century, essentially. So right after, what's like the
Temple, second temple.
second temple, right? Roman time. He had hid from the Romans. There's the famous story about him and his son in the cave. And
2,000 years ago.
that's exactly 2,000 years ago. And Rabbi Nachman lived 210 years ago.
But he went into his grave and he was able to be accepted.
Communicate with the high power levels.
You know what's funny is that Rebbe Meir Baal Haness
Yeah.
is at the entrance of Tveria. He's on the left-hand side of the main road. And he's kind of very quietly over there on that first row. And then Rabbi Shimon is inside.
Meron.
Meron.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is also up there towards the north. Yeah.
Another half.
Yeah. You know, Breslevers are very well connected with Rebbe Meir Baal Haness. You know that Saba Yisrael, when we shared some stories about Saba a few weeks ago, Rabbi Yisrael Dovodeser studied and lived in Tveria, and he was in the room of Rebbe Meir Baal Haness for a good portion of his life. So there's a tremendous connection to Rebbe Meir Baal Haness in all of this, of course. But yeah.
People actually used to live inside the house, inside where the grave is.
Of
They would
Rabbi
spend
Meir?
Of Rabbi Meir.
Yeah, Meir Baal
What
Haness.
grave was that when Rabbi Cardona took him when he was young, the first night that the family was looking for Sabah?
I think it was 17.
Yeah, but what was it was the grave and the water
A shul.
raised. It
Yeah,
was
the
in
water
shul.
started to raise.
Tiberia.
It was in the Tiberia. I think it was the shul of Rebbe Meir Baal Haness, no?
I think it was something
I
else.
don't
They
know.
found an unlocked shul.
Right.
They went in and the water
water
was
yeah.
flooding.
went out.
Yeah, because it was flooding. Because it was raining outside, and it started to flood.
Was Rebbe Nachman one of the people that walked up to heaven and like their physical body? That was I heard there was like 5 tzadikim that were like that.
Yeah, there are 5
Eliyahu
people.
Navi.
Eliyahu Navi is one of those people. The daughter of Yaakov Avinu Tzerach. No, the daughter of Asher Tzerach was one of those people. The father. No, it's not the father of David Melech. Was it? There was a few people that their bodies were taken while they were alive and went up. Rebbe Nachman is not one of those. Yeah, Tzerach. Yeah. Tov, Baruch Hashem.
חזק וברוך.
The merits of the holy tzadikim. Wanted to hear.
Israel